Ever since I started making commentary videos about bowling, my comment section has been flooded oddly with people calling for the left-handed bowlers to be banned. You heard that right, banned. And I gotta come clean. I, myself, am a lefty. And while some older right-handed players are thinking we're cheating the system, getting unfair advantages, and basically playing bowling on easy mode, they think they're suffering through the impossible. But here's the thing. As someone who's bowled left-handed competitively for years and talked to pros on both sides of the debate, both left-handed and right-handed, the reality is far more complicated than these rage bait level keyboard warriors think. So today we're going to try and settle this once and for all. Is bowling left-handed actually an advantage, or are right-handed bowlers just looking for excuses? So I collected some data for this video, but full transparency, I might be a little biased, since I am a mid-rev one-handed lefty, so obviously there's a little bit of bias there. But I didn't rely on my own experience for this video. I talked to dozens of bowlers, youth players, collegiate stars, regional competitors, and yes, PBA professionals, both left and right-handed. Heck, I even threw in some European bowlers for some international perspective, because apparently this debate isn't just an American thing. And just to make things interesting, I also ran 2 polls with my audience to see what casual bowlers think versus what the competitive players told me directly. The results, let's just say, they don't exactly line up. But before I tell you what everyone thinks, let me explain why this debate even exists in the first place. To understand the controversy of left-handedness, you have to understand what right-handed bowlers go through during competition. Picture this. It's game 3 of an 8 block on a PBA pattern. Within that time span, somewhere between about 4 to 24 right-handed players have been throwing down the right side of the lane for about an hour or 2. The oil pattern is completely demolished, and what started as a predictable 41-foot pattern is now a completely unpredictable burn that many are beginning to call unscorable. Right-handed players are constantly chasing the transition, making huge moves left, switching equipment every few frames, and watching their scores plummet as conditions become nearly unplayable. But meanwhile, on the left side of the lane, maybe 2 or 3 left-handed players are dealing with relatively fresh conditions, and the oil pattern probably looks almost exactly like it did when the tournament started. This is where the narrative of lefties have it easy comes from, and honestly, it's true sometimes. But what a lot of right-handed bowlers don't understand is that having fresh oil doesn't automatically make things easier. In fact, it often makes things way harder, especially at the beginning of competition. Most lefties, including myself, struggle massively with the heads, the front part of the lane, being too burnt from all the right-handed traffic from deep right-handed play. This usually forces us to play unusually straight, much more than we want, often jamming the pocket from positions that just don't feel normal. Meanwhile, right-handed players get to ease into transition a little more gradually. Lefties often have to find a line immediately or risk being left behind by rapidly changing conditions on the right side. When tournaments have more even splits of left and right-handed players, this advantage basically disappears. It's only when there are significantly more righties than lefties that they get their supposed easy mode. There's another factor that casual fans almost never consider, the strategy, most specifically with the equipment. Right-handed bowlers can pack a logical progression of bowling balls, aggressive equipment at the top, benchmark for transition, weaker equipment for burnt conditions. They have a game plan coming out of the gate. But us lefties, we're basically packing for 3 different tournaments. We have no idea if the pattern will play long or short, if the heads will be immediately gone, or if we'll need to throw it 25 miles an hour to get any pin action at all. One of the bowlers that I asked for this video, Dennis Bissonnette, a Brunswick staffer and accomplished one-handed lefty, explained it pretty much perfectly. And to directly quote him, lefties tend to bring a wide variety of random stuff, because if we find the right ball, we're probably in that all day. Righties have to have progression in the bag as blocks go on, so their ball choices are more based off of having to move. I've talked to lefties who have brought 7 different bowling balls to a tournament and only used 2 of them, while others needed every single ball in their arsenal just to stay competitive. There's no predictability, no standard progression, it's just educated guessing at best. Here's something that most people don't really take into account when they consider lefty versus righty. When you're the only lefty in a sport shot league, the breakdown is completely different from what you would expect, similar in higher level tournaments. Sometimes transition doesn't mean ball down, it means standing closer to the pocket and throwing it as hard as possible to jam it through the pins, trying to split the 8-9 with just a little luck. So when I wanted to get some deeper data on this debate, I ran 2 polls with my audience, but more importantly, I reached out to the competitive bowlers as I mentioned earlier, from juniors to regional pros to European players. First poll, is being left-handed a big advantage, slight disadvantage, or big advantage? Most of my audience, which skews older, late 30s to mid 50s, chose slight advantage by a supermajority. This makes sense, since at a league level, lefties do have easier conditions most of the time. But on the other side of the spectrum, the competitive players told a completely different story. Charles Bostic, who won the ITC at Weber and was one of Georgia's best bowlers, put it perfectly. There are major advantages to being a lefty and also major disadvantages. With more right-handers in the field, the transition on the left side is pretty much non-existent, which makes it easier for lefties to score. However, the complete opposite can happen. If the left side is very hard to start, the left-handers are at a major advantage and are essentially shut out. And with this message, he also gave me a brutal example of when lefties go wrong. When the Masters was at Suncoast 2 years ago, only one lefty made it to the top 64. Jesper, Buttroff, and many top-level pros on the left side weren't even close because the pattern was more advantageous to righties as the transition helped blow the pattern open. Another person I asked, Scott LeBow, a personal friend and a Hammer staffer and also a regional pro, echoed this sentiment. It's a double-edged sword. If we have it, we have it. If we don't, it's really hard to develop it because the number of lefties bowling is never really enough to develop it. Or at least quite like the right side. But if we have something out of the gates, we won't lose it. The international perspective was even more revealing to me. Anders Christensen, an excellent Danish two-hander who I bowled against when I went overseas this summer, told me, the left is an advantage when there's some friction, but when the lanes are flooded, or it's a 46-foot plus pattern, then it's a huge disadvantage. I hate asymmetrical patterns. Some of them are so in favor of right-handers. I played on one recently that was 1.7 ratio on the left and 2.2 on the right. And another bowler I talked to, Dutch bowler Jarn Martinez, was brutally honest as well. Most patterns are not symmetric, and most of the time the left is easier. Like throwing backup, most of the time it's easier. Lefties have the lane most of the time, but when the pattern is asymmetric and it's not in favor, it is a huge disadvantage. But the second poll I asked was the real test. I asked, would you switch hands if you could retain your exact skill level? The results were telling. A super majority of right-handers said yes, they would switch to the left-handed in a heartbeat. They're convinced the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. But the left-handed bowlers, only a small percentage wanted to switch to right-handed. Of course, this could be flawed as only a few hundred people responded, and of course, about 10% of bowlers are left-handed, so that makes sense. But still, out of the portion that did respond, about 14% on that poll, 2% said they would switch, and the rest wanted to stay, even knowing the disadvantages that they face as a lefty. But some righties in the comments assumed this was because lefties get easy oil in automatic strikes. But those of us who've actually competed know a little bit better. We know that untouched oil often means unscorable conditions, especially when you're trying to create some sort of angle on the left side. And the truth is, most right-handed bowlers have no idea what they would be getting into if they switched. They see the occasional tournaments where lefties dominate and assume that's just the norm. But they don't see the countless tournaments where lefties struggle to make cuts because the conditions just don't set up for left-handed play. Now, I'll admit, there are times where left-handed advantage is absolutely real and just completely obvious. Let's look at the World Series of Bowling over the past few years. There's always at least one telecast where the difference between left and right-handed players is glaringly obvious. Usually, it's because one pattern is either asymmetrical with a slight lefty advantage, or short enough that transition destroys the right side while barely affecting the left. When this happens, lefties can sit in the same zone all day with minimal adjustments, while righties make massive moves constantly. These are moments that fuel the band crowd. They see lefties shooting 240 while righties struggle to break 200, and they assume this is just always how it works. But they don't see at the next tournament where all lefties are at the bottom of the leaderboard because fresh oil plays completely differently than expected. But I think the most revealing insights came from competitive players who understand how different oil patterns create completely different games for both left and right-handed bowlers. Riley Spear, a top junior bowler who made it to quarterfinals in match play at Junior Gold, broke it down by pattern type. I think it can be either an advantage or a disadvantage depending on the environment and pattern. On higher ratio patterns, I think it's an advantage because transition on easy patterns will always make them more difficult, while the left side gets to stay easy for a majority of the tournament. But on the other hand, it's definitely a disadvantage on extremely flat and low ratio patterns because the transition on the right side will give the pattern more friction while the left stays flat. This discrepancy in patterns explains why left-handed hate keeps going. And a lot of the people who I asked said that a lot of lefties just throw urethane and never really throw anything else because that's the only thing that doesn't really shut them down. But here's something that gets lost in all the condition and equipment discussions. Technique matters way more than handedness. The best bowlers succeed regardless of what hand they use because they understand how to read conditions, adjust their game, and execute under pressure. I've seen right-handed bowlers dominate tournaments on heavily broken down conditions because they've had the technical skills to adapt. I've also seen the exact opposite. I've seen those left-handed bowlers fail miserably on fresh oil because they just couldn't get something going. The handedness debate often becomes a convenient excuse for poor performance or lack of versatility. Instead of developing better lane reading skills or improving their physical games, some bowlers would rather blame the conditions or call for rule changes, however ridiculous that rule change might be. Another factor that plays into this disadvantage for the lefties is coaching and development programs are overwhelmingly meant for right-handed players. Left-handed bowlers learn to translate right-handed advice, adapt right-handed strategies, and figure things out independently. While this eventually creates mental toughness and adaptability, it also means slower initial development and more confusion during the learning process, especially when people are telling them to move constantly when they really shouldn't be. Everything in bowling right now is optimized for right-handed players. Left-handed bowlers become generalists out of necessity, not choice. They have to do the same thing over and over because it's the only thing that can work consistently. So after talking to dozens of bowlers, analyzing poll results, and considering every angle of this debate, what is my conclusion? Being left-handed in bowling is both an advantage and a huge disadvantage. It all depends entirely on the context, which is why I said to consider all context in that poll. In league bowling and on house patterns, yes, lefties generally have it easier. Fresher oil conditions, less competition for optimal ball paths, and predictable scoring. But really, as a righty, you shouldn't really be complaining about a house shot, because we all have the same miss room, regardless of how the lane develops. But when you look at the high-level tournament play on challenging patterns, it's complicated. Sometimes there are quite significant advantages, sometimes there are major disadvantages, and most of the time, it's roughly equal with different challenges for each side. The biggest advantage left-handed bowlers develop isn't condition-based, it's the mental game. We learn to adapt, problem solve, and succeed in environments that weren't designed for us. That adaptability of being left-handed becomes crucial at the highest levels of competition. The real issue with the left-handed bowling controversies is that it distracts from more important discussions about competitive fairness in tournament design. Instead of calling for bans on left-handed bowling, which is just straight up ridiculous, tournament directors could implement format changes that minimize condition-based advantages. Better pattern maintenance could level the playing field. And also, the equipment industry could better develop left-handed specific products and coaching resources. Now, How would you do this? I'm not really sure. But to put this on the table, the dark side by DV8 is an entirely two-handed based bowling ball. It is meant to be thrown two-handed, it is meant for that type of player. But one-handers, we don't really have any one-handed specific balls. Yes, we have bowling balls that works better or worse than others, but there's no really balls meant for us. Same thing with lefties versus righties. I think this would be a cool idea to try, but I don't know how well that would sell. But back to banning left-handed? That's ridiculous. That's not solving anything. And look, I understand why right-handed bowlers get frustrated when they see lefties dominating. It feels unfair, and sometimes it genuinely could be unfair. But the solution isn't to ban an entire group of players and pretend that left-handed is just the greener grass on the other side of the fence. Instead, the solution is to acknowledge bowling, like most sports, has elements that create advantages and disadvantages for different types of players, like height in basketball, reach in boxing, and, of course, handedness in bowling. These are all part of what makes our sport so interesting and complex. And although my audience voted that left-handed bowling is generally easier, and for league and recreational play, they're probably right. But at competitive, where the debate really matters, the advantages are situational, the disadvantages are real, and success comes down to skill, preparation, and execution. So the answer to the original question, is bowling left-handed really an advantage? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but always more complicated than the internet wants to admit. And to the people calling left-handed bowling to be banned, maybe spend less time complaining about your handedness and work more on your spare shooting. Trust me, that will improve your ranking far more than eliminating a small percent of your competition ever will. Well, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below, and leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. We're pretty close to 10K, so I'm hoping to hit that soon, or relatively soon. But I have a few comments to address. First of all, I have had a lot of people, specifically this guy, I'll try to find his comment, calling my voice AI. Should I do a face reveal at 10K? Yes or no? I know I've shown my face in videos, I think, before, but, most people don't know that, I guess. I'll do an official in their video. But also, vote on the poll. I've put out a poll a while ago asking if you want to see chamois or what type of merch you would like to see at 10K. But that's all I've got time for today. So I'll see you guys next time.